when we look at some of the startling numbers about women in leadership and who's at the table making incredibly important decisions that affect women, that affect our lives, our bodies, at the future of our children, our planet, we are disproportionately not at the table. And I think so much there's a conversation around like girl power, just empower yourselves, like love yourselves, ladies. And to me, I'm not interested in that. I am way more interested in actually providing tools.
Hello, dear friends and damn givers. Welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast. I'm your host, Nick LaPara, and this is the show where I sit down for meaningful conversations with people who aim to build fewer walls, longer bridges, and bigger tables with their lives and work. My guests want to leave the planet much better than they found it, and I truly hope today's conversation gives you hope and pushes you to give more damns than ever before. Friends, before I introduce my guests today, let's talk Thanksgiving. Many of you listening around the world may not celebrate Thanksgiving, and if you do, it's not happening this week. It's happening some other time in the year. In the United States, however, where I currently live, it's Thanksgiving week, and Thanksgiving Day is coming up. Because there is a huge spike in coronavirus cases, and because we are going into somewhat of another lockdown, many of you won't be seeing friends or family for Thanksgiving. We, speaking for my family and I, won't be seeing our extended family, and that's sad. So I wanted to acknowledge your pain and the general heaviness of this year. And not that you're looking for permission from me, but I wanted to give you permission to be sad and grieve so much about this year, and grieve that you'll miss being with family and friends in just a few days. But if I may, I implore you to not stay there. Gratitude is key right now. So many of us are experiencing a very privileged existence in the world, and we have everything we need and more. So once you're done being sad, once you're done feeling sad, consider spending more time than you normally do this year being grateful and sharing that gratitude with those around you. Make some phone calls, send some texts, and let's allow gratitude to encourage us and carry us during these hard times. Happy Thanksgiving, my friends. I love you all. Hang in there. Now, my guest this week is actress and activist June Diane Raphael. June is married to actor and comedian Paul Scheer, but we don't talk about that. June has starred in shows and movies like Parks and Rec, New Girl, Grace and Frankie, and Long Shot, but we don't talk about her career all that much. What I wanted to have June on to talk about is her company, the Jane Club. The Jane Club is an organization that takes care of the women who take care of everything else. Now, before the pandemic, they offered a physical space in LA where women could receive childcare, work on their projects or companies, get a massage, and so much more. And since the pandemic started, they've had to give up that physical space, and they shifted their company online. And you know what? They've grown some 450%. So what does this have to do with Let's Give a Damn? So much. And you'll have to listen to our conversation to find out more. It's delightful. Get ready for it. Before we begin, however, a quick reminder that you can anytime and for any reason, and I mean that, email me at hello@letsgiveadamn.com, or you can text me at 646-328-6414 to join our texting community, where I'll send you updates and we can chat back and forth anytime you want and about anything. And now, let's get right into my conversation with the amazing June Diane Raphael. Let's go. It is such a pleasure to have June Diane Raphael here on the Let's Give a Damn podcast. Welcome, June.
Hi, Nick. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it is absolutely my pleasure. I'm so excited to get to speak with you today. We have so much to get into, but let's begin with just how you're feeling, how things are going. Just a few. We had planned, and I always try to plan these for 75 to 90 minutes, and just a few minutes ago, your teammate that was connecting us on this was like, can we keep it to an hour? There's childcare issues. They're back in lockdown. And I'm like, hell yeah. Like, I totally get it. This has been some crazy few months. So how are you?
Oh my gosh. Well, all things considered, and in the big picture, I'm doing just fine, truly. But it is an interesting time where, like, the domestic sphere has never been so present, and public. And that's one of the things I actually like about this time is the understanding and and that's something I hope to take forward with, even when we are, out of lockdown and out of quarantine and into a vaccinated post-COVID world, that people's lives, which I think, especially for women, we often hide or pretend are not happening or don't want to reveal because maybe it's going to imply that we don't care enough about being here, are seen in a different way now. And I think actually there's more space for all of that labor to come to light and for people to really acknowledge it and say, oh no, that's valuable too. And I see that that's happening, and that takes oftentimes precedent. So I am totally juggling, and I am fortunate enough to have the work of domestic laborers in my home. God bless them, a full-time nanny, and someone who also helps me clean the house. So I have help with the domestic labor I do in my home, and still am a little bit underwater.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been easy, but I know it's also easier for me than others. And I think, the way I'm feeling in general is that my days start off really good and I'm really energized.
Yep.
And then slowly I descend.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder why.
I mean, it's like the reality of the world and the reality of what's happening.
Yep. Yeah, and there's a lot. I mean, the election, like it just feels so heavy right now. I can start my day out, and I'm naturally not even optimistic. I am just a very energized type A, like creative, Enneagram 8, like go out there and build and protect and destroy a few things in the process. And so I can start out my day. I start out my day with so much energy, like ready to go. And then I'll get into the emails and news and social media. And for a living, I tell stories in a variety of mediums. And I start thinking about all that's going on. And I'm like, damn, like if I look right now at my yard right now, everything looks perfect. It's a sunny day here in Nashville and, everything looks fine. But out there's so much pain and hurt and so many people not taking seriously what's going on. So the weight of everything, even if you do have all the help that you have, like it can get a lot. It can become a lot.
Yeah. And I used to be able to put our kids to sleep and then put in another few hours, even if it was while watching TV and doing kind of the admin of life, getting through certain things that needed to be done and emails, et cetera, the kind of busy work. And I'm finding that I'm actually not able to do that anymore. That when night falls and the children are asleep, I have to get into bed.
Yeah.
And I have to just be in bed. It's so that's new for me. I feel like I'm not as productive in that way, but I don't have a choice in some ways that I think is good.
Yeah.
Because I have to shut off.
Yeah. And I think that's fine. The post-COVID world is going to look a lot different for the industries we work in, for everything. Everything is going to look different. And I think it's going to need us to be energized and rested up and ready and available, because I think there'll be a lot of opportunities, a lot of new ways to create and a lot of new ways to help and a lot of new ways to affect change. And if we're tired out from just hustling our way through the pandemic and not caring for ourselves mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of that, then we're not going to be up for the task. So I too have felt that. I generally am a kids go to bed, spend some time with my wife, then I'm back out in my office working till 1 a.m. sometimes. I have like 5 or 6 different projects going at all times. And then lately, the last month or two, especially with the election shit and all that, like I thought, kids go down. And I'm like, let me just hang out here a little bit longer. Like, let's talk longer. Let's watch one more episode. Let's just chill because I am beat. Like, I am drained. And
Yes.
that's just where we are.
Yeah. And I think that so much has been, I don't know. I also believe that we don't feel as a society and culture really comfortable grieving and
Mm,
really comfortable naming grief and things that we've lost and sitting with that. And sometimes I think the work of grieving is actually the work of being still. And I think that I'm doing my grieving, the loss of seeing my friends, the loss of, things that my children have lost, the loss of seeing certain family members and my nephews. I think I'm doing that work at night. And I think it's really important that people name, I mean, listen, I think it would solve a whole host of things if we were able to just say,
yep.
we've lost things and it sucks and it hurts. And we can sit in that and we can do the work of grieving. I think mostly our culture responds to grief by saying like, that's really sad and gotta move on, gotta
Yep.
get back out there. And that's going to be the
Yep.
best thing for you is to get back out there.
Yep.
Well, maybe, and maybe not. And
Yeah.
so I think that, I mean, I'm just putting this together right now, but I think that at night I'm doing some of that grief work of
Yeah.
just sitting.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. I get it. Well, good for you. Keep that up because again, I think a whole lot of us are going to need the energy for whenever this is over. I'm
Yes.
trying to store it up. I'm trying to, prepare for that because I hope it'll be in the next few months that we can begin to figure out what the new reality
Me
looks
too.
like.
Me
And
too.
it's going to look a lot different. It's going to look a lot different. So I'm ready for it. Okay. So
Yeah.
in this conversation, we have a lot to talk about. I want to talk about the Jane Club. I want to talk about your book, all the different ways that you are helping all kinds of people, but especially women. But before we get to that, let's get some understanding for who you are. For those that, I mean, a lot of people probably know your career, but I'm interested in the backstory. I'm so interested. I ask people questions for a living right now, and I love to like figure out how you became who you are today. Someone that does care about these things that we're about to dive into. So when I say tell me your story, whatever comes up, the who, what, when, where, and why of your early life, and then how did you get here, and then we'll
Gosh.
move on from
Okay.
there. That's a pretty small question, right? Like get that done in a few minutes.
Let me see how to editorialize this. Well, I think that I had a really happy childhood and a joyful childhood. And I'm really grateful for that. And especially, having met so many people who have had childhoods filled with trauma.
Mm,
Um, I didn't have that. I'm not saying I didn't have wants and needs that weren't met. I did. But at the end of the day, I felt loved and unconditionally loved. And I felt like I had a family structure that was committed to joy and laughter. And so that was really in my DNA. And I also, I guess this is sort of connected to it all and why I am interested in women and complicated women in terms of playing them and characters, but also just in general, because I think
hmm
I was so deeply affected by my primary relationship, which was with my mother and her. I just grew up thinking women were hilarious and complicated and endlessly fascinating.
mm,
And I look back on it now, I'm actually like, I think it was a pretty rude awakening to go kind of come of age and enter into the rest of the world, which didn't value women and centered masculinity so much, because I grew up in more of a utopia where I had two sisters and a matriarch and a wonderful father too, that also thought my mother was hilarious,
mm,
fascinating, a storyteller. and her friendships were hilarious, fascinating, rich, with other women. And so I remember kind of walking into the world. And even in my high school, the girls were the sports stars, the girls were the top 10 of my class. It didn't occur to me that there was another world outside of that. And so that was kind of shocking in a way. But that's really how I grew up, which was being delighted by the complicated women in my life and loving how connected they were to each other, and how my own female friendships. I also had a group of 5 best friends who I am still best friends with from 6th grade on.
Wow.
Who I count as like deeply impactful to my worldview and to my belief in what women can do, and also how special these relationships are. Because one of the things that I think internalized right away was the women have, and the women in my life had this uncanny ability to kind of weed through what was right in front of us and immediately connect to what was true and real. And so I look back on that and the way that I grew up in this sort of, in some ways, feminist utopia, even though I grew up in a pretty Irish Catholic conservative town. There were all these other messages that were so positive, from my father too, believing that I could do anything.
Yeah.
And my father, for some early formative years, staying home to take care of us, my mother going to work.
Wow.
Again, I had this sort of egalitarian, and by the way, I don't think that they necessarily wanted it to be that way. I don't think that was just what economically made sense, because my father was a construction worker in the city, in New York City, and when there was no work, and it made sense for him to stay home and do some of the primary caretaking while my mother went to work. So it wasn't unusual for my father to pick me up from school and take me out to lunch, cut my hair, do some of the. So I think I also had modeling for manhood that was different from what I would then walk out into the world and see.
Yeah. So that was that's a great segue into what I was going to ask, which is, at what point, I mean, it's your childhood sounds, obviously there's always things, right? There are probably, things that happen, negative memories, all that, but it sounds pretty almost utopian, as you pointed out. At what point did you realize, was it while you were still under their care, or once you had left, that you realized, damn, like the rest of the world isn't like this. Like, not everybody's like this.
Yeah.
This isn't what most people, I didn't experience that. I love my family, and my parents have gradually grown and matured separately and together over the years. And they're a lot different than they were when I was growing up, but it was not like that growing up. It was the exact opposite of what you just described. So at what point did you realize, man, my experience is not everyone's experience?
Yeah. I mean, I think even in high school, even in high school, I started to, as I was going through puberty and like super boy crazy and obsessed with boys, which I really was, I started to already in those kind of, in that kind of romantic way, feel like the boys had power and that I didn't have power. And so I think those messages were already coming up, that if you were a girl and you hooked up with a guy, you were a slut and you had a name. And that was very prevalent in my high school, and you were punished. And so that I remember being really thrown by, because in my world and my girlfriends' houses after school, we were iconic. We were untouchable. We were, had agency. And yet once the boys arrived, and we were of course obsessed with all of them, they did and we didn't. We were objects. And those negotiations, I remember being really bummed out about.
Sure.
And like a part of my personality definitely became different in relationship to men, and I became very quiet. I didn't feel like myself. It took me a very long time to have what I think was like an honest relationship with a man, because I felt that what was required of not just me but all of my girlfriends was that we somehow had to do this calibration. And what was even more deeply complicated is I was also obsessed with boys. So it was like, I wanted them so badly. I wanted their attention so badly. I wanted them to want me so badly. And then I was also so scared of them. And I was also, that it was just so, and then I was also like I was also going home to a father who's, at like 14, whose like lap I was still sitting on and was so attached to. And so, but then I would go out on the street and I was my full height, which was 5'9" at 11. And I would be, catcalled by grown men at 11 years old. And so there were so many competing messages of like trying to find a young womanhood and girlhood that was, I guess, fully realized. It was very hard. So I guess it started as early as that, but I did still, even in that, look to my girlfriends for ways to kind of survive that and to negotiate that. And I think we definitely tried to work within the system. We did not try to disrupt it, because what we knew was the boys had power. We wanted their attention, but we also knew we couldn't be sluts, but we wanted to be sluts. But all of the stuff.
So much.
They were really so much, but they were really, we were certainly more powerful together, so even in that kind of fucked up, like world of high school and young womanhood and sexuality, there was still this power in community of women.
In this upbringing that you're describing, where mom and dad were so present and so there, and it seems like there was a great dynamic and relationship. Was there also an openness to have hard conversations and talk about this stuff with them, or were you having these conversations, going through this alone and with your friends and sister and all that? Okay, go into that for a minute.
Yes, no, I definitely didn't have. And so this is what I mean by like, I look at my parents now. My parents have both also passed away. So I may paint this as more idyllic than it actually was, because I spend every day missing them. But I did not have parents who, I always describe my parents this way. Like, I had some girlfriends whose parents listened to the Beatles growing up, and my parents listened to Elvis growing up. They were also a little bit older. So that's like, if you're listening to Beatles, that's a whole different mindset than growing up listening to Elvis. Yeah. So my parents were older. They, my sisters and I joke, we heard my mother say the word penis one time and one time only. And it was to describe what prostate cancer was. And she said, it's cancer of the penis. And we all like screamed and started laughing hysterically.
She said the word.
So there was I never got to talk. Nobody discussed sex with me. We had 3 teenage girls in the house. And like, I think about that now. I'm like, what the like, it's so crazy to me. Yeah. But at the time, I think there was one book that my dad covered, like, used to cover a textbook. There was one book that was like passed along, and I don't even know if it got to me because I was the youngest of 3. So we were certainly left on our own to figure that out. And there were no conversations around that. But I also grew up in like a very conservative town. And complicated politics. Like my parents are both Catholic. My father was pro-life, but also an environmentalist and also against the death penalty. Like I actually think about his politics, and he was a Bernie Sanders supporter, right? He died right before the 2016 election. But I'm like, you don't necessarily see his type of politics anymore, which was, like we were, before anyone was doing this, my father was composting in the backyard, buying from thrift shops, never had an air conditioner because so we were doing things that were, people just thought we were weird. But my father really was an environmentalist and believed in like sustainable energy. So
yeah.
But we didn't have, certainly no conversations about sex at all. And I just was left to, again, through the community of my girlfriends, able to figure a lot of that stuff out and find safety in them. Did not get that from my parents.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah. That seems sort of par for the course for that generation of parents. Yes. Like it just, we won't dwell on it anymore. The point has been made, but it's same in my household. I mean, so I'm one of 12 kids. My parents had 12 kids and eight
Wow.
boys and 4 girls. And it wasn't until I was 14 or 15 that we had sort of a like wet dreams sort of conversation. Not even a full on like, okay, this is sex and this is pornography and this is this and here's the boundaries and here's none of that. And I was 14 or 15 with 8 boys, like talk about raging hormones everywhere.
Yes.
And that's sad. Like, in fact, I'll say this. I have 3 kids. They're 6, 7, and 8. All 3 of them already know more about sex and the reproductive nature of women.
I'm sure.
Yeah, sure, maybe. But like definitely when I was a teenager, they know more already because I want them, it's kind of like the drawer in your dad's desk. He's like, don't ever go in there. Well, of course, that's the drawer I'm going to want to go into.
Exactly where I'm going. I'm going nowhere else but there.
100%. So like I grew up, don't drink, don't smoke, don't do any of that stuff. My kids see me, drink alcohol responsibly, smoke weed responsibly, do all the things responsibly. And we have these conversations because I want them to grow up being informed and to never be afraid to talk to us about it. I want them to come talk to me and say, here's where I'm struggling. I don't know what's going on. Help me.
Totally.
The friends are great. And it's so cool that you have that community of, ladies around you, but like a parent's, that's a pivotal role.
Oh, and by the way, we're all 12 years old. I mean, how much patience do we have? To the point where when I was in college, my first year of college, I got a raging UTI. And again, nobody told me because I didn't have parents ever talked about this. Like, oh, if you're a young woman and you're having sex, like go to the bathroom afterwards. Otherwise you're at risk for UTI. Again, great information. Wish I'd had it. Well, I didn't do that. And had such a bad UTI that, and of course I'm a recovering Catholic. So at that time I'm like, well, this is it. This is the punishment that I deserve. And I'm sure, and this was in, I guess, 98, I'm sure I have HIV. And you know what? I should. Like these were the types of messaging because I had no one who told me any valuable information. So I definitely wanted to have different conversations with my own kids. And I also recognize nobody had those conversations with my parents either. And they were limited. And
our generation gets to break that cycle, I think.
For sure.
I hope we get to do that.
I think definitely we do.
Yeah. And we should take advantage of that. Like that's an opportunity that's presented to us. We get to change the nature of the conversations happening. We get to destigmatize all of these like off limits, beware topics. Like, no, that's not that big of a deal. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Okay. We're going to talk about, I want to get into the big stuff right now. But before, I just want to say, we're not going to talk much about your career because people can go out there and look for it. Many people have already watched your stuff, and so I don't want to spend a lot of time there. I went real quickly before our conversation just to IMDb, just to like look at all the things that you were in that I didn't know you were in. And it just kept scrolling. It just like literally I had to scroll 4 times or something. I think you have like 80 something actress credits on there. So that's amazing. Like congrats on all of that incredible work. I don't watch a lot of TV, so I haven't seen a lot of your stuff. But I'll tell you the 2 roles that were not even like main roles that you've done that I loved. One was Sadie in New Girl.
New Girl.
I loved your contribution there. Always fantastic. I mean, you were in like 8 or 9 episodes, I think it was, but like always loved seeing you come back. And then you were hardly in there at all. I wish she would have come in like a more of a role, but what's her name? Tinifer. In Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
I loved like that episode where you and April go back and forth. Man, that just
I love
made my
that
day.
too. That was so much fun.
Yeah, super fun. But obviously, you're like way more well known for Grace and Frankie, being Jane Fonda's daughter. I would die to do anything with Jane Fonda, let alone play her daughter on TV, right? But yeah, super great stuff with your career. But what I'm interested in is the Jane Club and this amazing book that you co-wrote. So let's spend the bulk of our time there, if you don't mind. And I know that the Jane Club has had to. I want you to describe what the Jane Club is, what a Jane is, and all that all that it took leading up to you and your team starting this thing. But then I think it's important to to point out and to talk about, okay, the main ways in which you all were functioning can't take place during a pandemic. And so what's happening, like this is pivot season for you all, figuring out, okay, this is important work. It's super huge work, and we'll get more into that, but we can't do it in the ways we did before. So why don't you start by talking about how did the idea for the Jane Club even come about?
Yeah, I mean, it is connected to the book in a way, because I think writing, I was writing the book, and I was starting my 4th season of Grace and Frankie, and I had just had a baby, and motherhood for me was really, well, I guess it was all the things, but I was very shocked after having my second at how difficult it was for me to kind of transition back into professional work outside the home. And I felt like I was either hiding. I mean, we just talked about this at the beginning of our conversation, like hiding, not just the actual care, like the physical labor of the breastfeeding and the taking care of small children, but also hiding like the emotional labor of holding them in my head at all times and being with them at all times, and feeling the weight and responsibility of being the steward of their childhoods. And I felt like if I were to admit that, and if I were to say that without apology, that people would think that I don't care enough about this other professional work that I'm doing.
Wow. Yeah.
That people would assume, and there's real data to support this, turns out, that when women are having children later and later, I had my first child at 34. And now we're having children at the same time. Like we've put this investment into our professional careers, and it's probably starting to pay off. And we are starting to make the most amount of money we'll actually ever make in the entire course of our career.
Yeah, sure. Right.
And
this is the prime.
That's intersecting at the exact moment we're having our first and second children. And I was feeling the chaos of those critical years of both caretaking and child development, and those critical years of your professional career. And conversely, men, so women either opt out of the workforce or start to get paid less. They call that the motherhood tax. And conversely, when employers look at men and look at men having children, they actually start to make more. And it's because most employers and companies assume that men are going to work longer hours, not less. Yep. We assume that women are going to be taking off. We assume that men are going to be putting more work in. So anyway, this is where the Jane Club, the essential idea of prioritizing and centering the work of caretakers and the work of caretaking. And that extends also to the paid work of caretaking. So centering and valuing the work of domestic laborers. centering and valuing the unpaid work that women do and men do in taking care of small children, taking care of elderly parents. I mean, I fundamentally believe that like we like to think of ourselves as a society that cares about children, but we don't really.
We do not. We
We
do
do
not.
not. And in the same ways that culturally is receiving all of these messages about mothering and stay at home mothers, and their work, and how kind of devalued that work also is, I just became very disturbed. I became really frustrated that I had internalized all of these messages from like one woman on the cover of a magazine about how she had done it all, and listening to her hot tips on how she scheduled it and how she manages and does all these things. And how there's very little actual institutional change. There's very few institutions that have been made and created with mothers in mind. And so that's where the Jane Club started and came from. The idea that women could arrive to our physical location and they could drop off their children. We took care of children from 3 months on. So our real focus was in the new mother and her transition, and really providing some scaffolding around that transition and some real support around what that means. Because what also is happening, and was my exact experience, is that women are taking care of those small children and taking care of older parents. So on both ends, we have this unpaid labor we're doing, plus our professional careers potentially, plus hopefully ourselves. So really starting to acknowledge and name the work of caretaking that women are doing, disproportionately women. And so the Jane Club started as a physical location where women could come and bring their children to our child care center we called the Nest. And the location we had in Los Angeles, the Nest is on the first floor. And then the women would come up to the second and third floor, and where the children were not allowed. There's a real important separation of church and state.
Yeah.
And then they could do their work. They could meditate. We hosted classes every day. They could work out. They could get their nails done. We didn't put a judgment value on what they needed to feel okay. For some women, that meant, showing up for like an enrichment class, like a Spanish class, or if they wanted to learn another language, we offered a lot of kind of enrichment, educational courses. But also it meant, for some women, like getting a blowout because that was what they couldn't get to. So all of these things, the basic premise was we're taking care of the women who take care of everything and everyone else. And centering them in every conversation, and making sure that we're offering childcare all the time at our events at night, at our activist events. I'll talk about the transition into the digital space, but we still do tons of postcarding and phone banking. And it's really important for us to say, hey, just because you have children doesn't mean you can't engage. We will provide a way for you to do that. We will constantly acknowledge that other labor you do. You do not have to make it invisible here. You will never apologize about having to parent. I mean, and that's something like people get in trouble for at the Jane Club if they say, I hope I didn't apologize in the beginning of this conversation, but people truly get in trouble for saying like, I'm so sorry, I have to run and pick up my kids. We just don't accept that.
Yeah.
And that's been,
and that's been ingrained in people, right? You started out talking about how in this country, one of my most frustrating conversations that I have on a recurring basis with fellow Americans is I'm Guatemalan and American. My dad came to the U.S. from Guatemala when he was a kid, so I feel very like in between. Like I don't feel fully American, and I traveled the world for 8 years, and it's a mixed bag with me. But when people talk about us being the greatest country in the world, it's like that's just simply not true. Like if you're talking about the ability to make money, yes, we figured that out, and usually it happens by hurting a lot of other people in the process. If you're able to make like these, humongous amounts of money, a lot of people are hurt in the process. But we're not great in so many other ways. We're high in infant mortality rate. We're low on the we are low on education, and like you said, we do not provide. We're one of the only like advanced economy countries that doesn't provide it, like doesn't mandate maternity leave and paternity leave. I mean, there are countries that give you a year if you're, for the mother, and like six months or more for the father. Like that's the way it should be, because those first few months are so pivotal. But all I've experienced in my life is my friends trying to figure out how they're going to go back to work because they got to pay the bills. They're going to get fired if they don't. A lot of places don't even provide it at all. And I have friends that have had to use their vacation days to stay home with their newborn. That is crazy. That's evil. That is evil. That's insane. That is no good. And so I love this. I mean, I forget the number right now, but it's over $100,000 a year is what every mother is worth. Like for again, it's disproportionately women that stay home. And I see that changing now, and I'm glad for it. But traditionally, it's like over $100,000 is what their job, quote unquote, job is worth between cooking and laundry and caretaking. You put all that together, what a woman does with and for children at home, and it's ridiculous. And so I love the Jane Club. I love this idea that, I saw on your website, honor all work, come as you are, show up, be of service. These are important things and I love even what you just said a couple seconds ago about not letting women get away with, okay, I've got kids, so I can't be an activist. I can't get involved. And it's like, no, you actually should. And you actually can and probably should. So we're going to help you do that. We're going to find the space. We're going to help you find the space to do that.
And I'm always like fascinated by how people view that work of caretaking, because listen, even if you're just looking at it from like American value system and capitalism, like, well, that is, we are investing in the next workforce if we just want to look at it that way. And that's not my value system, but like, if we just wanted to say, okay, this work should be valued because it's an investment. Which is not how we function. And also, like, I am also really obsessed with how little we value the elderly, who can't work, who can't feed into our economy anymore. How we value, I think we're seeing it with the pandemic, those who take care of them and their work, what we feel like they might offer a society if they're no longer making money. So I do believe that we are really due for a new conversation around value systems and productivity and our addiction to productivity, and where our values that we say we have. I think we love to say it, but where they're actually showing up in practice. And the Jane Club has really been formed now since we had to shut down our physical location with COVID. We moved into the digital space. And although it was really scary and terrifying, and I thought in March, like, this is it, I think we're done. I don't know how we come back. What ended up happening is we expanded. So we had all of these women arrive, in our digital community, and we have an internal messaging system, and we have childcare programming online. We have daily phone banks, and activist opportunities and educational opportunities and wellness opportunities. And what I'm finding is like, oh my gosh, like we need to be connected now more than ever. And setting this standard for what the Jane Club is saying that our value systems are, which are not rooted in And if you have professional success, that's great. And we're going to celebrate that. But we're also going to celebrate all types of success,
Yeah.
and we're
Yeah.
also going to name and grieve together. And we are ultimately more interested in like how you are than what you do.
Yeah.
And we're at the core of why we started and why we're still here. We are going to honor your work of caretaking in whatever way that shows up. We have a lot of women who are not mothers and never want to be mothers. And we demand that that's seen too, and that that's valued, and that women don't feel that this has to be prescribed for their future, that choice is just as valuable and needs to be destigmatized.
Yeah.
And also, we have now, which we had some, but now we have even more of a diversity of genders. So we have men in the space too who are having a new conversation around like their roles as caretakers. And what, again, I talked about my own father and how like I had that modeling, but most men don't. And I remember my dad saying to me, he really appreciated that he got that time with us and didn't know how much he was going to enjoy being a father, and I think most men don't look at that as a possible. I mean, I think most men probably assume they're going to be fathers, or, it is still like socially kind of prescribed.
Right.
But don't necessarily look at it as something that might be the source of challenge and reward and deep reckoning and joy, and accomplishment.
Yeah, I've had this conversation quite a bit with male friends of mine during this pandemic that, again, traditionally were out there working, stay-at-home mom, taking care of the kids, all that stuff. And now that the pandemic hit and most of them are, in an office in their house, or like in my case, I'm in the back shed of, in the back of our house where I'm working the last few months. And I, spent a lot of time traveling, flying from here to there, meetings here and there, projects with clients and consulting stuff. And I was home not as much as I wanted to, but when I was home, I tried to make it count. But I was gone for, a week, 10 days at a time on a plane. Then I'd come back and we'd get reacquainted and do the whole thing. Now, since March, I've been at home. I actually had a trip planned for next month, my first trip in 9 months, and canceled it 2 days ago because of this resurgence of, this spike. So I went from being on a plane so much to 9 months of none of it. But what that's given me is a deeper peek into the amazing work that my wife does with our kids around the home, all that stuff. I still do, I've always have been, I cook, I help clean, I do the laundry, I do all that stuff. But the kid thing was the thing that I was missing. When I'd come home from a trip, I would literally, the first conversation I have is, hey babe, like what's new? Like, what am I missing? What is the new quirk? What's the new thing, Belle's getting upset about? What's the new thing that Roman's doing to disobey? Like having to get that. And now I'm seeing it every single day. And it has been so good for a lot of my friends. And I know for me to be in this now for 9 months, like really, really feel it, really, really get to know it. And so I think the conversation, again, this new reality, right? This new post-COVID reality is going to be, I think, really good for relationships, for, and it's also exposing a lot of bad stuff. Like relationships that weren't good are now worse. Like I've had a couple of friends get divorced during this time, and that sucks, but it's been hard, right? But for those that are like really in it and trying to make it work, and there aren't those problems that, the answer is divorce at some point, like, it's deepened it and it's really helped out. And yeah, there's hard conversations, and I've yelled more than I care to admit. But here we are, me with a deeper knowledge and really being able to identify more with what my wife has been doing for, 8 years now.
And I also think it's forced a lot of people. What I hope, you're talking about the new post-COVID world. I also hope there's a new conversation around like intergenerational living and potentially, elders spending more time in homes, seeing like the rampant, COVID cases and what's happened in nursing homes, and really a new conversation around the caretaking of elders.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
because I have been like particularly disturbed by that, and how it's not necessarily, and of course there's so many people who have zero choice, and it's heartbreaking, and that they
Right.
can't take care of their parents, and that is absolutely devastating. I've had that experience, with family members who have gone through that with their parents, and it's absolutely heart-wrenching. But I do hope that that basic idea of like, if you're not well, I'm not well, and if the elders aren't well, then I'm not well, and if I'm not well, they're not well, and that
Yep.
sort of connection, I think, in the same way we are with our children more because we are in the same space. I hope there's a new conversation around how we take care of those who are aging and can no longer take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's a real beautiful conversation. We could talk about that for just an hour. I mean, nursing homes, again, as you pointed out, some people can't help it, and that's sad, but it's a reality. But for that to be the default, which it is for so much of our society, it's like, oh, when they get too old for us to take care of them, or translation, it's too hard and I don't want to do that hard work. We're going to put them in this home and they'll be well taken care of. But it's like, it's not your family. Like, those aren't your people. They don't care about you. And for centuries and millennia, there's been that family structure where it is from like birth till death. Like, you're a family. You're taking care of each other. You're being taken care of. You're being taken care of. And now it's just
Right
not.
now, I think that people have to make those personal individual choices, which I don't judge, because we're not set up for another way.
100%.
We're not
Yeah.
set up.
Yeah. We need to transition to that new sort of
Yes.
society, that new reality, and really to value having elderly people part of our lives, and and there's hard stuff that's going to come along with that. The older you
Yes.
get, the more senile you get, the more, just things aren't all there.
Yes.
And that's okay. Let's have
Yes.
let's do the hard thing. Let's have those conversations. That's really beautiful. And I assume, and maybe I'm wrong, so if I am, pardon me, but with the transition from the physical space to an online space, I wonder if the price point is more so that more people can get involved. Maybe people that couldn't do the whole physical space thing before, but now they can jump in on the online community.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the, the price point of our physical location always garnered a fair critique of how, we were pricing out a lot of women who needed the service, and we always had limitations there. We had limitations because we had our rent, and we had limitations because of how many physical bodies we could fit in the space.
Yep.
And we had limitations because we were also committed to paying our staff a living wage in Los Angeles. So I could defend those reasons, and they were true. Did I do the best job at like thinking of every possibility to work around that? Probably not. So I think those were really fair critiques of our space. We've had a much easier time making this accessible to so many women because we can lower our price point. It's $50 a month to be a Jane, but we also work with any Jane who needs to be on a sliding scale because we can.
Yeah, yeah.
But we ask because we are also running a business and want to pay not everyone on our executive team. And I talk about our employees, but I'll talk about the executive team as like a different situation because we have equity in the company and our setup is different, but we can't all get paid. I don't get paid. Our CEO doesn't get paid. So we still do charge because we want every woman who works to be paid for what they do. And we also want to grow and expand. But we have much more of an opportunity in the digital space to make this an equitable setup and a way more inclusive community. And because of that, it's better. It's just plain better. It's more robust. The conversations that are happening with women who live in like bumblefuck Texas,
Yeah. Yep.
and have a point of view and have an experience that's so wildly different from, the sort of like silo that I am in Los Angeles and the voices I constantly hear. We're better for it. The community is better for it. And it's really exciting. And we also have a lower price point for Janes that are 60 and above. And again, we are committed to working with anyone who wants to be in our community on a sliding scale if they want to. So we just have much more capacity to build the community that we actually want to build.
Yeah.
We're really limited with the physical location and the price point there. And we were always chasing that. So, since March, we've grown, our membership base has grown by 450%.
Amazing.
And so we're really proud of that. And Janes are getting, you asked, what is a Jane? And I'm like, oh, it's so what I have found, because again, I've also received a lot from this community. And yes, I've been responsible for building it, but I've also sometimes just am witnessing it. And sometimes I'm just like really getting the resources from it, is that Janes are really interested in helping each other and interested. They're generous. They show up as they are. There's a commitment to I always say like being adults. And what I mean by that is like, if you need to come late to a meeting, you come late. And if you need to leave early, you leave early. Like, we're adults, and there's also a commitment to working on ourselves. And we do a lot of racial affinity work. We do a lot of diversity and equity. We have a whole diversity and equity lab where, you talked about hard conversations, transformative conversations that I can see are life-changing. They have been for me in understanding my own race and position in the world and the ways in which I walk through the world. So that educational piece is really important to us, and building a community that prioritizes that. And we also prioritize, I'm going to say it, but we do joy and believe fundamentally that if we don't get in touch with having fun, and even in the work of, for the white women in this space, understanding their identity and their race, especially as it's related to Trump and the percentages that have come out of white women, even in understanding that and going through the difficult process, also committing to the joy of learning and the joy of getting more free in whatever way that is. So, sometimes I think people look at that work and look at, all of it is so heavy, and it is difficult. I'm not saying it's not. And there's a process that I think a lot of specifically white people go through. But I also think there's a lot of joy at along the way and within community. So we have difficult conversations, we have fun conversations, and it's really, it's hard to describe. That's the only place we fail constantly, is describing what it is. Sure. Because ultimately it's a platform. And I was talking about Facebook the other day. I'm like, oh, is it crazy to ask people to pay $50 to be part of our community and to join this platform where we offer both live gatherings, and then there's the social connection online, and there's all these different ways we connect. We have book clubs that are super engaging. We do all of this stuff. And I'm like, well, but you know what? People get Facebook for free and their data is being sold. You know, so
100%.
And we do, I think, a very good job of moderating all of our channels and facilitating the discussion so that those spaces, we don't use the term safe space anymore, but they are courageous spaces.
There you
and
go.
People are offered feedback, and, nobody's canceled, and we try to make those spaces as harm-free as possible. Well, we put a lot of thought and energy into that. And that's not happening on Facebook. It can't.
Nope.
So yeah, there's an intimacy and authenticity to the space, this digital space that we've created that, again, has really been led by the community itself. I don't feel like I can take a lot of, I wish I could like take full credit for it, but it really has been community led. And, you know, we also, like, on our executive team, did something that was super uncomfortable for me. And I'm so glad we did, which was in April, the very beginning of April, like we started talking to the community about how the business was going and just told them.
Imagine that. Yeah. Imagine that.
Just like, this is hard. If we don't like grow by this percentage, like we will have to wrap it up. We did have to let someone go. We did have, like, we are completely reorganizing to try to make this work. We also don't have childcare, like just fully putting it out there.
Yep.
And although that was deeply uncomfortable and I was in like a full body sweat, I was also like, people showed up to help us.
Beautiful.
And so we have been really, this transition, because we were so caught off guard, forced us to be transparent in a way. I'm like, oh, I'll never return to that other version where like the leadership holds itself over here to this, like, and we try to do all the work and not show it and just like show the beautiful experience. That's really changed. And that's the culture I'm now actually really proud of.
I really, really, really love the Jane Club. Like
come be a Jane, Nick.
I might. I mean, yeah, it's much different. Like people are going to pay for this because they're not getting any of what you just described on a platform like Facebook. Facebook is so confusing. It's so like blank slate. Like anything goes there. So you can't really, I'm not saying it's impossible to build real community, but it's so fucking fake. And it's so easy for people to get in there and sabotage ideas and conversations and stuff. And primarily, we're not all there for the same purpose, right? Yeah. Where if you join something like the Jane Club, you're there to uplift, to empower, to receive, to give, and all of that. I mean, every city needs a physical Jane Club, but I'm so glad that now this thing gets to grow like globally online, you know?
By the way, like that's the other thing that's happened is it makes our growth plans now make a lot more sense because we can look at the map and see where all of these chains are and then work on opening physical locations and where there are already these communities. Yeah. As opposed to opening a physical location is so capital intensive and the way we are growing now is just so much more sustainable and makes a whole lot more sense. That is still the North Star for me, making sure that we're offering childcare. Again, we don't have a government that subsidizes it and provides it. And so making sure, especially for new mothers who want to be able to, in between calls, come down and take a music class, who are not ready to do that full separation from their very, very tiny baby, who can breastfeed. I know I said kids weren't allowed on the second and third floor. The only exception to that, of course, is breastfeeding. Babies who are welcome everywhere. But who can do the work of mothering without apology.
Yeah, that's important.
Is really important. And so that still remains the North Star. And I actually feel like now we're better set up to get there.
Beautiful. We're about out of time, but I do want to ask you quickly, because I think the book is so important, Represent, The Women's Guide to Running for Office and Changing the World, that you co-wrote with Kate Black. Sort of a toolkit, right? A guide for women running to run for office. And I think we need so much more of that. There's like 500,000 different political offices that someone can hold. And right now, still by and large, they're being held by men and by white men mostly. And so that's got to change in this next generation so that our kids have the space to work out and publicly thrive on all the stuff that we're teaching them in the home, right? Because if they experience it at home and then go out into a society that is misogynistic, that is, anti-women, or not anti-women as much as like you're in that role and I'm in this role. We've got to get rid of that. So real quickly, like, what's your elevator pitch for this book and why should people go read it? Because they should.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like similar to the Jane Club is when we look at some of the startling numbers about women in leadership and who's at the table making incredibly important decisions that affect women, that affect our lives, our bodies, at the future of our children, our planet. We are disproportionately not at the table. And I think so much there's a conversation around like girl power, just empower yourselves, like love yourselves, ladies. And to me, I'm not interested in that. I am way more interested in actually providing tools and providing the granular resources that take that idea, because we can all say like, yeah, women can do it. Any girl can be president. Well, guess what? We had a really amazing candidate and we couldn't vote for her. So probably the most qualified presidential candidate. So I do think that we need to talk about the real stuff and how it's actually done. So the book really provides a roadmap, that takes a woman from that kernel of an idea of like, maybe I should consider this, to actually putting her name on the ballot. And because it's not easy. And the information on civic engagement, I really do believe, we don't teach civics anymore really in public schools, is kept away from us for very good reason. It's kept mysterious. It's seen as someone else's work. It's seen as something you do if you have a ton of money, if you're male, if you have degrees, and if you're white. For the rest of people, like, it really seems better left to someone else. And so the book proposes a basic premise, which is that we should all consider it. Women should consider it as something they might do. That's all the book is asking. Yeah. Consider it, and consider it with these things in mind. We're going to talk about the reality of your life. We're going to talk about the fact that women don't make as much. We're going to talk about the fact that women don't have access to wealth in the same ways that men have worked for generations to build. We're going to talk about the fact that women are taking care of small children and elderly parents, and that time management is going to be a key part of this. And we will talk about some of the internal barriers as well. The inferiority complex, the imposter syndrome that disproportionately affects women, and even when they are far more qualified, don't feel that they are. So we address all of it, and I hope it provides women who are potentially considering this as something they might do, a vision and how it can be done.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the conversation shifting drastically from, hey, women, we're inviting you to the table, right? Because that implies that the women don't own the table, right? That implies they're still getting permission to come. They have to get permission to come, versus women owning the table, right? And that's the shift I'm looking forward to seeing in the next 5-10 years. And you're helping with the Jane Club, with the book. You're helping people feel empowered enough. You're helping future AOCs and Ilhan Omars to say, like, I can go from bartender to congresswoman.
Yes.
Like, that's a very plausible transition. It's not impossible.
Listen, it's called We the People. It's not called we the certain ruling class.
Yeah. And that's the shift that needs to take place. I talk about the Constitution all the time. We the people did not mean women. No mention of women in the Constitution. Black people were 3/5 of a person, so they weren't even seen as real people. And Native Americans were seen as savages in the Constitution. So it was only for white landowning men. And that needs to shift finally several hundred years later. We need to take that seriously and say, okay, if we the people doesn't mean all the people, then fuck your Constitution and let's rewrite the damn thing, because it doesn't apply to everybody. It doesn't apply to everybody. We can't like salivate and like worship this document that doesn't represent everyone. That's dumb. It's dumb. Okay, I'm going to let you go. You have been amazing. Thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you for the Jane Club. I hope that some of the listeners will join, men and women will join the Jane Club after hearing our conversation. And I so appreciate you coming on today.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for having me. If anyone is interested, they can head to janeclub.com, and there is a special code. Oh my gosh. See, this is my failure. It's like,
Well,
I talk about the big stuff, but the little stuff is so hard.
Well, let's tell them there's a code.
There's a code.
You get it to me later, and
Okay.
I'll put it in the show notes, and we'll go from there.
It'll be a special code for half off your first month. And again, I did talk about this, but we do offer Jane sliding scales memberships as well that are completely anonymous. And so I hope to see some of your listeners there. And thank you so much for having me.
My friends, I truly hope you enjoyed this conversation today with June. So much to learn from her about taking care of those that do the most work around us. Visit letsgiveadamn.fm for resources and links. You can sign up for our email list there, and you can listen to the other 180 podcast conversations there. And make sure you check out janeclub.com. In my mind, the monthly membership, it's super cheap for what you're getting in return. And remember, they do have that sliding scale membership in case you need that help right now. So check out janeclub.com. Follow June Diane Raphael everywhere online. She's a fun follow. Lastly, thank you all for listening. Again, I say this every week, and I mean it every week. I'm truly honored that you come back week after week after week to listen to me talk with amazing people. This show is produced by Chad Michael Snavely and the team at Sound On Sound Off Studios. Let's Give a Damn is part of the Matter Media family. You can reach out to me anytime and for any reason at hello@letsgiveadamn.com or text me 646-328-6414. I love you all so much. Be safe. Keep giving a damn. Bye for now.